Hi everyone, so welcome back. Today I'm going to do section 2 of AWS Security Services Overview. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get started. Awesome. So since we are on the section 2, which consists of detection and monitoring services within security services, and then I will try to do that as one part. But if I cannot do it, then there will be two parts for section 2, but most likely it's going to be one part. And also this time I'm going to do something different. And by different, I mean is I'm going to complement my slides along with explanation or details of those services as a case scenario with ChatGPT. So I'm using ChatGPT excessively, and then I would say, we're really grateful to Sam Altman from OpenAI, who did such an amazing job along with his team to bring us ChatGPT because it makes life so much more easier. Okay, so what we have now is this part, a detection, which is continuous monitoring consisting of CloudWatch, CloudTrail, Config, Inspector, X-Ray, and those other services. We covered the entry part. Now I'm doing the detection part, and there will be 2 more videos covering the prevention and protection part. So coming to this slide, right? So now this is how those services in one slide work together as a big picture or as an overview, right? As you might know, everything that I'm doing on my channel as of now is doing those things as an overview. So I'm not going into details with those services. I'm just putting them into one big slide and see how their interaction or integration, how their interaction is and how they integrate with one another. So now, this is what it is. This is what we have, but I will be going one by one. So I won't go into full screen on my PowerPoint because this way you will be able to see it more easily. And I want to show you my, I would say, ChatGPT. So what I was doing from before is I have those questions in here, and then they will give me those answers. But what we'll do this time, we will be doing it live, right? So I'm going to then open a new chat and then I won't write the questions again, but I'm just going to copy and paste the same question in here. Okay, before we put that into ChatGPT to give us some explanation, what I'm going to do is start in here, right? So maybe your focus should be just now on this part. Please disregard what you see on this side. So this is the main place. So what I did was I dropped a VPC in there. And then within that VPC, I added some EC2 instances, Elastic Container Registry, Elastic Kubernetes Services audit logs, VPC flow logs, DNS logs. And I will tell you why I'm putting it in this specific, I would say, manner or way. And then I'm just dropping Inspector, GaurdDuty, and then here you go now. All the service, all the, I would say, security, I would say overview. I wouldn't say security overview. So what happens is you install an inspector agent on your EC2 and ECR, and then anything unusual that's happening within these services is being sent to inspector, and then inspector would be sending it to some other services for analysis, right? So for inspector, the EC2, anything happening on EC2 on ECR goes to the inspector service, and anything that goes from VPC flow logs, DNS logs, in AKS audit logs, they go to the GaurdDuty. Once again, since I'm doing an overview, I won't be going into details of each of those services, but I will still say what each service stands for and how they work. For example, before we go into each service, what they do, so in here you can see I have them separated. So if we have AKS logs, we have VPC flow logs and DNS logs, they are sent to GaurdDuty. They are not being sent to inspector service, right? So inspector service or agent is only being used by EC2 and ECR, and then anything that's really kind of talk about the DNS log or VPC flow logs or AKS logs, they go into GaurdDuty. So that's how they are being, I would say, differentiated in a manner. And then I dropped SecurityHub, EventBridge, and CloudWatch. So then anything from the inspector service is being sent to SecurityHub and EventBridge, and then GaurdDuty is then sending its finding to the SecurityHub, to the EventBridge, and CloudWatch. So to this point, you might be wondering, I have done nothing. I only dropped those services, and then I have pointed to the arrows what's happening. But we are going to do that in a bit, or in a second, using ChatGPT, and then this way you will also see the power of ChatGPT and how they work, right? So now I'm going to talk about this part, right, which is EC2 ECR service along with Inspector, SecurityHub, and EventBridge. So in the ChatGPT, I will put a question saying how the EC2 and ECR service work together with Inspector Service, SecurityHub, and EventBridge, and then give a case scenario. So that will be my question, which I'm going to be putting into ChatGPT. So here you go. How does Amazon EC2 and ECR work with Amazon Inspector, SecurityHub, and EventBridge? Please explain step by step the interaction and integration with a case scenario. Again, putting it as a case scenario is much better, because that will give you, I would say, more, as an example, they will give a good example, and then we'll go step by step how those services work together. So what I'm doing, I have a subscription, so I'm using ChatGPT 4 rather than ChatGPT 3 because the answers are more concise, and then they're also more relevant. I mean, definitely ChatGPT works well too, but ChatGPT 4 is a better version. So here you go. I put my question in here, and let's see what's going to happen, right? Okay, so I'm assuming it's going to be the same content as it happened from my previous time that was trying to do the same thing. So as they're going to load the answers, what I'm going to do, let's just go how it works. So Amazon EC2, ECR, Inspector, SecurityHub, and EventBridge are different services that can be used together to improve. I'm going to move this thing a little bit here so you can also see what's happening here, along with reading what's going on here, right? So here it is. So, okay, here you go. Here's an example of, okay, so these services can be used together to improve the security and monitoring of your application. So basically, that's what they do. And then here's an example of how they do it. So first, they say set up an Amazon EC2 instance, right? So in this scenario, you have multiple EC2 instances, which you can see in here, running your application. EC2 instances are virtual servers that allow you to run application on AWS infrastructure. So now this is the point where there will be some description of each service, right? And then set up ECR, right? So Amazon Elastic Container Registry is a managed container registry service that makes it easier for you to store, manage, and display Docker container images. So that's what they do. So, and then what a Docker container image is, for example, it's a script of how you wanted to run a certain web server, how you wanted to run a certain server, right? If I wanted to load, I would say, an e-commerce website on my EC2 instance, right? So, and then there will be certain requirements of how that EC2 instance should work, or should respond, or should behave. And there is a script of how it works, and that's put in the form of an image, and then that image is being stored into the Elastic Container Registry. So again, not going into details of how the ECR, how the container image actually works. But let me give you an example. For example, you go to a restaurant, right? And then you have a nice meal that comes in front of you, right? And then you ask maybe the chef, if you know them, what's the recipe for that meal, right? So the recipe in this case is actually can be considered as a container image. So ECR is actually, I would say, the kitchen, and then or maybe instead of kitchen, I can say it's actually the cookbook. So ECR is the cookbook. Inside the cookbook, there are recipes for certain dishes or meals. And then those recipes are actually the container images, which are being stored in the ECR, right? So this is how you can differentiate what an ECR is and what a container image actually is, right? And then what you do is you use that recipe to make a meal. And now that meal is your EC2 instance running a certain web server, say an e-commerce website or anything. So ECR is your cookbook. Inside the cookbook, there is a recipe, which is the container image. And then the container and then from the container image, you're going to make a dish, and that dish is actually the EC2 instance. So that's I would say how it works by giving you a real life example. Okay, coming back here. So ECR is a managed container registry service that make it easier for you to store, manage, and deploy Docker container images. You will create an ECR repository to store your container images and deploy them to your EC2 instances. So this is how it works. For example, I'm putting some some container images, and they're being pulled by the EC2 instances, and then we run the EC2 instances. Now, then we have the Amazon Inspector for security assessment, right? So now this is what we're going to talk about here. So Amazon Inspector is an automated security assessment service that helps you identify, so let me see, highlight this part so you can see what I'm reading. Inspector is automated security assessment service that helps you identify potential security vulnerabilities in your EC2 instance. So it's very important to notice it's actually for the EC2 instance. If they say they do the security assessment of VPC flow log, DNS log, or AKS other logs, that's not right. So they only work on the EC2 instance and also ECR, right? And then you say it does this by analyzing the behavior of the application running on your instance and comparing it against a predefined set of security best practices. So for example, I want my EC2 instance to run to be in a specific way based on a best security practices. If it doesn't do that, then I'm going to be getting a notification that something wrong is going on with that EC2 instance. So that's what the inspector service is doing. And now it says you can configure Amazon Inspector automatically run security assessment on your EC2 instance. For example, you can schedule recurring assessment to run every week, ensuring continuous monitoring of your application security picture, right? So that's how Inspector works. And now we talk about the Security Hub in here, right? So the Amazon Security Hub provides a centralized view of security alerts and compliance status across your account, right? So what it does is it aggregates security findings from various AWS services, including Amazon Inspector, in a dashboard, right? So what's happening is Inspector service is actually collecting those security assessments from the EC2 instance, and then it also has its own dashboard where you see them. But if you send them to Security Hub, where the security assessment from other services is being collected as well, now you have a bigger picture of all the different things happening on your application related to security and compliance, right? So that's why kind of like Security Hub is a more advanced dashboard compared to an inspector, because in Security Hub, other services findings are aggregated as well, but inspector only has its own assessment, right? Now, enable Security Hub integrated with Amazon Inspector to receive security findings from your assessment. Security Hub will then correlate and prioritize those findings, making it easier for you to identify and remediate potential threats, right? So we talked about the Security Hub as well. Next up is event Bridge here. So Amazon Event Bridge is a serverless event bus that connects application components with data from a variety of sources, right? It can be used to automate security workflow by reacting to specific events and triggering actions in other AWS services. For example, if the inspector finds something fishy into the EC2 instance, that will trigger Event Bridge, and then maybe the Event Bridge is going to trigger Lambda, and then Lambda is going to do something that remediate that security incidents or fix that issue, right? So in this scenario, you can create. So let me highlight this part in here. So in this scenario, you can create an event bridge rule that triggers when a new high priority security finding is detected by SecurityHub, right? So this rule will then be send a notification to your security team or trigger a remediation action, such as patching a vulnerable package or isolating a compromised EC2 instance, right? So that's what it's actually doing, right? Awesome. So that's now you know how the event bridge works. It kind of send you a notification that something is happening in your security hub, and then it kind of trigger a remediation action, maybe through a Lambda function, and then it kind of patch a vulnerable package or kind of isolate an EC2 instance that being compromised. Again, we will be using quite a bit of Lambda function to do those event-driven actions. So Lambda is a serverless compute service that does event-driven action, right? So something happens, in response to something is going to do a certain action. Awesome. Okay, so that's where it is. So now they say here's a step-by-step integration in interaction. So deploy your containerized application to Amazon EC2 instance using images stored in the Amazon ECR. So I have an image stored here in the ECR that's being pulled by the EC2 instance, and then the EC2 instance will run that image, right? So configure Amazon Inspector to run security assessment on your EC2 instance here, generating security findings, integrate Amazon Inspector with SecurityHub in here, sending the findings to SecurityHub for aggregation, correlation, and prioritization, and then set up an Amazon Event Bridge rule that triggers on high priority security findings detected by the SecurityHub. So what happens? Something was wrong on EC2 instance that was sent to the inspector. Inspector sent it to SecurityHub, and then the SecurityHub trigger an Event Bridge, or maybe the inspector can trigger Event Bridge directly as well, and then the event bridge is going to trigger a Lambda function, and Lambda function is going to do a remediation action, right? And then you configure the event bridge rule to perform a specific action, such as notifying your security team or initiating a remediation process, right? Okay, so the final thing is by integrating these AWS services, you can create a robust automated security monitoring and response system for your application running on Amazon EC2 instance. So here you go. That's the most, I would say, beautiful way of how we learn, I'd say, AWS services using ChatGPT, right? So in here, I have some images which you can now understand. So what we covered in here was the EC2, ECR inspector, SecurityHub, event bridge, and then also part of the Lambda and SNS as well. So that's the first part. And then my second part is going to be how the security assessments or findings are being collected from the AKS logs, VPC flow logs, DNS logs. Then they're being sent to GaurdDuty, and then GaurdDuty is going to send that to CloudWatch events, Event Bridge, and also SecurityHub. And the CloudWatch event are going to trigger a Lambda function and an SNS. So now I'm going to put a question in the ChatGPT scene to explain this entire process or flow to me with a case scenario, right? So AKS, VPC testing, GaurdDuty, SecurityHub, Event Bridge, CloudWatch, and those other services. So my next question, I had a question before. So what I'm going to do, go to the same question instead of typing it again. So every time I type it, it has actually give me a different answer. A different answer, sometimes it's more detailed, sometimes it has, I would say, fewer details. But anyways, we go back to the chat that we had. So the first question was this part, and now I'm putting the second question. And the question basically, how does the AKS, if those things work together, then also give step-by-step details of the interaction integration with a case study. So I'm just putting that in there and see how it works. Awesome. So I'm just waiting for a few more seconds, so until they load a few stuff, and then we're going to read through it together, right? So it does a work, does its work, and then we will read what it has for us. So here you go, it mentioned or listed all those services, and then say to create a comprehensive security monitoring solution for your Kubernetes clusters running on AWS. Here's an example scenario broken down into steps and how it works. Okay. So now set up AKS, right? So Amazon AKS is a managed Kubernetes service that simplifies running containerized application on AWS, right? And then create and configure your Kubernetes clusters with Amazon AKS. So that's the first thing. So now AKS is again, say, managed Kubernetes services that simplifies running containerized application on AWS. So you saw that we said we have container registry, and then we have containers in which certain servers are going to run. And then Kubernetes service is actually, they say, is managed in a more simplified way to run those containers, right? Again, I'm not going to go into details, but there will be another, I would say, video entirely on how containers, Kubernetes, ECR, AWS Fargate, and those other services, computer services actually work. Okay, so we talked about the AKS. Now they say VPC flow logs actually capture the information about the IP traffic going to and from the network interface in your Amazon VPC, right? So let me highlight this part that we're actually reading this one. So they say capture information about the IP traffic going to and from the network interface in your Amazon VPC. So anything that's happening in here. So what does the VPC flow log is doing is capturing what's coming in and what's going out, or who is calling a certain IP address, what response is being given to that request, and what's happening. So what's coming in and what's going out in terms of the internet traffic. From a VPC is what a VPC flow log is actually doing. So now they say enable VPC flow logs for your Amazon AKS clusters VPC to monitor and capture the traffic service, the traffic data, right? So the VPC flow logs are being enabled on my AKS cluster. So imagine this is an AKS cluster, and then within that VPC, and then I have enabled VPC flow logs. So I wanted to see what's happening in there. Now talking about the DNS logs, which is Route 53 resolver query logs or DNS logs. So Route 53 resolver query logs allow you to log the DNS queries that originate from your Amazon VPC. Configure Route 53 resolver query logging for your VPC associated with your Amazon AKS cluster to capture DNS. So talking about the DNS is actually domain name service, right? What's happening is actually, for example, I have google.com, I have amazon.com, I have, say, example.com. So those are all those domain names. So any requests that are being made to those domains are being, I would say, kind of filtered by the DNS logs. So, okay, I entered this website at this time, I left it at this time. All those, I would say, findings or kind of assessments are being logged in the DNS logs. And then the coming to the GaurdDuty, right? So set up an Amazon GaurdDuty, right? So GaurdDuty is a threat detection service that continuously monitor for malicious activity and unauthorized behavior in your AWS environment. So this is the most important one. So whenever you hear about the GaurdDuty service. That's what they do. They do continuous threat detection and monitors for malicious activity in AWS environments. So it's not only related to a VPC or EC2, so anything in my entire AWS service that's happening, mainly for AKS logs, VPC flow logs, and DNS logs. I wouldn't say all the AWS services, but so far that I know and how much I have learned about AWS, mainly GaurdDuty is going to collect findings on the DNS log, VPC flow logs, and AKS logs. So there might be other things coming in, or they might already be doing that, which I am not aware of it. Just again, how much I have studied, how much I know so far. That's what GaurdDuty is doing. So they might improve it and then allow other services to be detected by the service for any malicious finding or anything. But as of now, that's what they do. So whenever you hear about the logs, think of GaurdDuty. Awesome. Okay, so we did that part 2. So now enable GaurdDuty to analyze and process VPC flow logs, DNS log for potential security threats, right? So next up, we have the SecurityHub. I think so we did cover that in the previous part 2, but again, SecurityHub is a centralized view of security alerts in compliance status across your AWS account. So now this is, I would say, a very nice definition of what a SecurityHub is doing. It provides a centralized view of security alerts in compliance status across your all AWS accounts. So then they say integrate SecurityHub in GaurdDuty to aggregate and prioritize security finding generated by GaurdDuty. So now the GaurdDuty is sending its finding to SecurityHub, which can be shown, I would say, in a nice dashboard. Next up is EventBridge, which we did talk about before, but let's just go through it once again. Is a serverless event bus that connects application components with data from a variety of sources. Configure EventBridge to react to specific security events from the SecurityHub, such as high priority finding and trigger action and other AWS service. So maybe the EventBridge is going to trigger Lambda functions to do a remediation action, a patching, or something different. Next up is CloudWatch events, right? So Amazon CloudWatch event is now part of the Amazon EventBridge, right? So and then you can use the same EventBridge service to monitor and react to CloudWatch metrics in events, including AKS audit logs. So now the CloudWatch events is being integrated with the EventBridge. So this is what we have. So both of those services can be same. Before they were different, now they work together, or they're kind of combined. So that's what it is. Next up, we come to the Lambda function. So Lambda function is a serverless compute service that lets you run code without provisioning or managing service in response to an event. Always remember, when there is an action in response to an event, that's what a Lambda function does. Okay. So and then create a Lambda function that performs specific action in response to the events from the EventBridge, such as isolating a compromised AKS node or notifying your security team. Then we have the SNS topic. So Amazon SNS is a fully managed messaging service that enables you send messages to multiple subscribers. Integrate Lambda with SNS to send notification to your security team or other interested parties with specific events. So anything that's happening here in Lambda, so maybe the CloudWatch event or the EventBridge can trigger a Lambda function and SNS directly, but then also a Lambda function can trigger SNS topic. SNS topic can send an email to my security team to do certain actions, right? Now this is the last part, right? So which says create and configure your so step-by-step integration interaction. So first of all, create and configure your AKS cluster in associated VPC. So this is my VPC, here is my AKS, and here are my EC2 instances. So EC2 instances are actually, if in this case, in here, will be part of the AKS, right? So, and then enable VPC flow logs in Route 53 resolver query logging for your AKS clusters VPC. So yes, we did that one too. Instead of Amazon GaurdDuty, and configure it to analyze VPC flow logs in DNS log. Yes, here that's what we did. And then they say integrate GaurdDuty with Amazon SecurityHub to aggregate and prioritize security findings. So we did that part as well. And then configure Amazon Event Bridge rules to react to specific events from the SecurityHub or CloudWatch events, and then create an AWS Lambda function to perform action and respond to the event. Integrate Lambda with SNS to send notifications to the security team. So it's basically the same thing that we covered one by one. So, we have if I kind of cover the entire thing that we covered in here, so let me start from the beginning. We have some EC2 instance. We are installing an inspector agent. So the EC2 instance is pulling container images from the ECR, and both ECR and EC2 is being inspected for findings by the inspector. The inspector sends those findings to the security hub, which shows those findings in a nice dashboard. And then that security hub, if anything fishy is going on, is going to send notification to the event bridge or the CloudWatch events, and they're going to, I would say, trigger a Lambda function to remediate that thing, the thing that's going on, something that's going on wrong, or kind of send a SNS notification via email or text message to my security team. And then now coming back to an AKS, right? So you can run your EC2 instance as part of Kubernetes services, right? And then what you do is you enable AKS logs, you enable VPC flow logs in DNS log. So VPC flow logs is actually any request that's going to and coming from an IP address on one of those EC2 instances inside my VPC. So all the instances that are inside this VPC flow log is going to monitor that. Same does with DNS, but DNS is now actually for the domain names through Route 53. So all those findings now are sent to a GaurdDuty, and then GaurdDuty is again sending that to the security hub. So now I have finding from the inspectors, I have finding from the GaurdDuty, and then now I have a bigger picture of what's happening on my VPC, right? And then if I wanted to take certain actions or automate the process, I will trigger an event bridge. Event bridge is going to trigger a Lambda function or an SNS topic. So I think I would stop here for now. Yes, that's quite a lot. I thought I will be able to cover everything, but still now you know how to use ChatGPT along with these slides to help you understand the services better. So remaining of those part in section 2, I'm going to cover that later on as well. So that's it for now.